Danielle Hardy from the nursing department and came here in 2005 and, no, 2009. I'm a little confused there. And I think in 2010 I became the community engagement coordinator for the department. So that's been my role, getting involved in the community. And prior to coming to Bethel, I had a lot of community experience, both as a clinician in the Frogtown area for many years and in some of the other communities as well. So it's a little bit of my background. So my thought today, and this is open to how we want to do it, but I was just going to start off just sharing a little bit about how nursing and marketing have been here longer than I, and they will chime in with their thoughts on this as well. How did nursing really get involved in community engagement, and what has it meant to our intercultural learning piece? And then just kind of go from there. I do have some information I'll share with you in a minute too. I think if I would sum it up, the reason the nursing department got involved is just to prepare nurses for the next generation, or this generation, and the next generation of the populations that we're seeing, and just to be prepared. Obviously, we know the trends in population are changing rapidly, and so that was a huge goal. Other reasons, large reasons, were things like social justice issues. We all know about what used to be called health disparities, but we're coming around to the other side and calling them health equity issues now. And that's kind of across the gamut, wherever you go in the U.S. or the world, we have health equity situations. And so really a social justice perspective and getting students to think about what is health really about. And it isn't just going to the clinic and that type of thing. And in fact, the University of Wisconsin did some research and put out some data that clinical care, which would be hospital and clinics, will only be 20% of our health. And the rest of the 80% would be the social determinants of health, which is our where we live, where we work, and the other things that are associated with health. So wanted to give students just that broad perspective. And the other area is reconciliation. I mean, it's a great time to work with other population groups and to think about reconciliation and the work that needs to be done. And what's generally happens, and this is a generalization, and I'll qualify that, is that everybody's willing to talk about health. So if we, and I'll talk a little bit more about how nursing got involved and how we began those conversations, but generally people are willing to talk about health. Maybe not their personal health, maybe the health of their community, but they're able to, or have a desire to do that. So it's a nice beginning place for us, I think. So how did we do that? Marge, I'm just going to have you, because you ran those focus groups early on. If you just want to give a brief.
We could do that. When we were revising our nursing curriculum, which had not been really revised since the program started, and I think it was 1982, other than lots of little tweaks along the way, we really wanted to do more connecting with the communities. And so Maureen Juarez was here at the time. And so we got some alumni funds, actually, to do focus groups out in the community. So we had graduate students work with us, too. So they actually helped lead the focus groups and analyze them. And I think it might have been 9 or 10 different community organizations, churches, schools, and some other organizations that we went out and did the focus groups with. Really asking the question, what is it that would be helpful to you that students could do, regarding health issues? So we got a lot of data from them, and then actually one of my graduate students for a capstone project wrote an article and it was published. So we were delighted with that. But that was really kind of a foundation. Then we had several large group meetings in which we brought community partners in too, to share what we were thinking, kind of structure and format and how we would do this. I think what's pretty unique about what we do is that it's integrated across the curriculum. So all 5 semesters that students have nursing courses, they're actually out in these community sites, the same community site over 5 semesters. So that was kind of the plan. And we then were able to work out by giving some of our course teaching load time to Carol for coordinating. We have about 10 hours each semester, except for the fall semester senior year, 25 hours for major projects. So we really get quite engaged in the community then. So that's kind of how it started. Those focus groups, meetings with community partners, and getting feedback on the structure, and then But there was a lot of development. The other thing we did, Beth Peterson led the
Reconciliation.
yeah, the reconciliation. She was a trained facilitator for that, so we had faculty do that for one semester, reconciliation meetings. And then we also did the Unnatural Causes series. It's a series of about 7 videos, and I think we took 4 of those and met a couple times off campus and a couple times on campus together with our community partners. And Carol, you were a part of that.
Yeah.
You were here for that. And got their perspective on health issues and what they thought was needed and what was not going well and what, you know, what kinds of things would be helpful. So a lot of input along the way.
Call those sessions Lunch and Learns, and I think we had 7 of them, and we really had good participation from the community. And I had a grad student with me at the time, and we created a document called Walls and Doors. That was the community terms for the walls being what was preventing them, for whatever reason for accessing healthcare, and the doors, what were the strengths of the community. And that was really fun to go out in the community, and we used something that I was not very familiar with, and maybe
Many of you in the room might be, it was called democratic dialogue, and where we engaged and really worked hard to engage the community and to hear their voice. And so we were directly involved with the community, and I think it turned out really well, and they gave us a lot of good information. And so from that, we have the students 5 semesters, and out of starting with probably about 10 sites, I just counted before I came down, we had 41 sites now. And we have about 80 students each year, give or take a few. And so we have 3 sets of students. We have, what would that be, 3 times 80, 240 students at any given time over about 41 different sites. Usually 2 or 3 students to 4 students at a site. And so that's been kind of the overall way it happened and where we're currently at. Another thing that I promised to talk to you a little bit about are the challenges. I guess let me start with what worked well. That sounds just a little bit better to me. And then we'll talk about what didn't work so well. One thing that the students figured out, and we figured out early on, is that working side by side, and we all know this, but for students to get it, to work side by side builds relationships. And when you build those relationships, and what we hear consistently from our partners is that, hey, we're glad you are here for 5 semesters. Now, sometimes it's a little overwhelming and they get tired, but generally they say, we're so happy you're here for that length of time, because a lot of schools come, jump in, they do a project, and they leave. And that leaves us feeling a little bit deserted, and I'm paraphrasing what they would say, but typically that's something that we hear. So that relationship building is just really huge. The other big piece is for students to recognize, and they do after a period of time, community as faculty or community as teachers. Oftentimes in healthcare, we tend to think that we know a lot about what it is that people need. We'll just talk about it from a health perspective. And so we go in with that belief. You must need this, you must need that. And so when we enter into that relationship, acting as if we know right away, we're put at a deficit as far as interacting with that community. And so to see the community faculty as teachers has really, really been a huge thing. And it's taken some time. We start out with our students as sophomores with their projects who think they really do know quite a bit about what they need to tell people, but over time. So those have been a couple of major things. Another one is simply learning to be adaptable. We call it embracing ambiguity, and we started the sophomore year talking about that with our students, and they still get frustrated all the way up to the senior year, because you can imagine all of us have our checklists and our projects that have to be completed. So for them to get on the community timeline, and believe it or not all community do email. And they don't always answer us within the first or second day. And sometimes they answer us faster than we answer them. We can't generalize. But it's different. It's just a different way of communication. So those are some of the strengths that we've seen. I don't know, you guys can chime in, nursing department, if you guys have any questions. Now, limitations and barriers. Anybody surprised that not everybody was on board? Not all of our faculty are on board? I don't think anybody would be surprised at that. That's good, though, because then that encourages us to, think about better ways to do it and challenges us to try and do things differently. So part of it was bringing faculty along, and we have a good number of faculty who are very committed and others who are coming along. The flexibility I talked a little bit about, huge for faculty, huge for students. Students have, for example, 25 hours right now in this fall semester. And they just, if they can't figure out exactly at the beginning of the semester how they're going to spend those 25 hours, they are just really in a tizzy, as we would say with Southern vernacular. I don't know how to explain it, but when we start with the sophomore and begin to work in and kind of walk alongside them, we're seeing now, we graduated our first class that went through the whole program in 2013, is that right?
2 years ago.
Yeah. So 20, yeah, okay. So we're now with the following classes, because we've learned a lot as faculty and students. I think we provide more support too. And I don't think any of you would also be surprised that the learning curve is huge. It's absolutely huge for faculty. It's absolutely huge. Sometimes for community and also for the students. What have we found? Another area that I just wanted to touch on before I hand out some other stuff to talk about is, what did we find that worked, and what's the approach that worked? And I guess one thing that I would say is embedding it in the curriculum, because it's there. The credits are there. It's part of 2 courses now. Hours actually come from 2 different courses. I think that's been huge.
Can you unpack that a little bit? So is it 15 hours for one class and 10 hours for another
Exactly.
class?
It's 15 hours for what we call our population-focused theory class, and then it's 10 hours coming out of our clinical class. And so that has really, really helped, I think. Another piece that's really helped is having the coordinator role. My role, I think, because it's good to have some time to work in the community and meet with people and establish those relationships.
And for the seminar piece,
Oh,
I think that's made a big difference.
Yes, in the theory course, we do a weekly seminar, and so students actually have time, even though it's a fully online course, we have what we call a community engagement seminar, and they actually come together for an hour, and they can work on their projects during that time. They can ask me questions. Other faculty come sometimes and talk about assignments, that kind of thing, and thank you, that's been really good. The other piece that's been really helpful is to collaborate with Sean and the Office of International Studies, off-campus programming and community engagement, and he's going to talk a little bit in a couple of minutes here about that. But that's been very, very helpful to be involved in the community. So I think the embedding in the curriculum, I think having somebody that's out there developing those relationships, continuing those relationships from a faculty perspective is it's really crucial. So I do a lot of community meetings, and I was just at one last week, and I registered with me and said, how did you hear about us? And I said, I have no idea. And I didn't. I really could not remember. But it was a community engagement learning series, of which I'm going to share some information with you from that. But it was wonderful because I met a lot of people, and that's really how we've developed our sites. That's how we went from 10 sites to 41, is developing those relationships. And then people asking. We've actually had organizations calling now and saying, would you please send your students? So that's worked really well. So, Sean, you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess there are kind of 3 hats that kind of merge into each other. One is the community engagement piece. And then it's just being mindful of like thumbprints, CSI stuff, kind of dusting, and what does it mean for this institution to make an impact on somebody? And so it's kind of like, what does it mean to be a neighbor? And normally, an institution like this is the biggest neighbor on the block. Most schools are when it comes to being a neighbor. So just being mindful of what it means to engage in otherness or intercultural dialogue. That's one thing I'm always being aware of, doing community meetings, asking. Now, the other part is service learning, which is what does it mean for someone to serve and to also learn through that service. And so it's a both and, serve to learn and learn to serve. And so that's kind of a balancing act when it comes to sites and working with Carol and other folks who are coming in. Just what does it mean to do both and then also recognizing that there is a resource, a benefit that the neighborhood receives in this, but also one that the college receives. Is this double impact, which is a really good fit. Then there's the interfaith thing that we're working on now. We have 3 of those events planned for the year, and they're kind of circled around the 3 F's of food, fabric, and festival. So food, fabric, festival, along with service. So the first one is the theme overall this year is telling your story through the arts. So the first one will be, how do you tell your story through the word? So whether it's spoken word, whether it's poetry, poem, hip-hop, how do you tell your story with words? The next one will be, how do you tell your story through drama, or comedy, or improv? The next one will be, how do you tell your story through visual arts? And each one of them we will invite students from the U, who are part of the Islamic Club, St. Paul College, Century College, and just coming out with our students, and then engaging in a service learning project. So what are we going to do when it comes to service together? So walking or working alongside someone else, just working. And I like to call it like the Tom Sawyer stuff, just paint the fence. And sometimes you can work alongside someone who has a different ideology about their reality. If you just give them something to do that takes their mind off of why are we debating up and down, left and right, yes or no, or whatever else. So we're going to paint this fence, and then we're going to break some bread and just laugh and engage. This is what we intend on doing this year, and building off of that and seeing where that goes. But I think that when Carol said that the community is the professor, I always grew up knowing that. Well, then, pay attention. We call it, just being street savvy. That there's something to be learned here, so pay attention. And so constantly paying attention to the professor, which is the Frogtown area, and the lessons that come out of that. And so I think that there are times when I engage with community members, and it's different engaging a community member than it is engaging with a agency that serves the community. So I may have a service in which I provide for the community. That's not the same as someone who may receive that service, or someone who lives in the community who has a different ideology of that. So we want to make sure that we have students who are not only participating in service learning in these agencies, whether they're schools or social work venues or churches, but we also want them to engage in actual community members, because you get this kind of, it's easy to put things on paper. This is two-dimensional. Right? But these experiences become 3D. And so every time you give them an experience of something that's actually involved in what it means to navigate one's reality, you get a clearer picture of what's actually going on, which benefits across the board. That helpful.
You reminded me of something that I kind of alluded to but didn't say. One thing that we strive to do is that looking at a community from a strength-based perspective, a strength-based asset approach, so that when we send our students into the community, one of the first questions we ask them on their little windshield survey is, what's right about the community? We don't say it like that, but what are the local businesses? What's going on in the community that shows the strengths of the community? And I think you alluded to that too, about building those relationships and finding out what's right. I'm wondering what you all's experiences are as far as community or your questions. I have a few more things here, but I'd like to hear from you, or what your questions are, or what your experiences have been, I guess.
I have questions.
That's okay.
Can I ask questions?
Yes.
How do you prepare students for the engagement that you are setting up for them?
That's a great question. Bernie and Margie can always chime in here. We started a class called 201, which I teach. It's called Foundations of Health Ministry. And in there, we begin to look at health equity, and we come from that perspective. We also come from a cultural perspective, just talking about different cultures, some traditions and cultural beliefs that we know may be true in some cultures, not all cultures, and certainly not within all cultures. And so we started in 201, that's the first course, and then in 202, that continues on so that students learn how to really do interviews. And again, we look at the health equity and start talking about access to health care, those kinds of things. And and we have, I did not mention it, like faculty liaisons. We have an outreach that's called
so each student is assigned a faculty liaison, and those faculty liaisons meet with those students as regular as possible to kind of walk them through the process when they're getting ready to go into the community. It's not all that we could do, but it's a fairly good beginning.
So you start with the head.
Start with the head.
And there's also a student community engagement consult with Carol.
That's right.
A couple times a semester, I think.
Yeah.
Right. So students can kind of share from their perspective.
If they don't want to come to faculty, they can come to one of those representatives, and then they bring it to the council and we talk about it. And scheduling is a huge thing. Once in a while, a safety question will come up. Is it safe to go into a certain neighborhood, or, those kinds of questions. But generally, it's, they're not answering my phone call, they're not answering my email, those kinds of things. The other questions are kind of fun. Does it count when I drive there? Is that, is that?
Oh, you mean the hour that it
Yeah,
takes you
does
to
that
back?
count as a cultural experience? Questions like that come all the time.
I think one of the students that I found is that when they don't feel like they've made a big impact, they want to make a big impact. And that's not very realistic. It's just a little snapshot of time that they're in there, really. And to realize that you're learning so much, so that's really a great deal for your future. But also, some of these things don't change, health behaviors. We don't see a big change, and so you can't always see your effect. So that's hard for them to know that. Just one quick story, I had a student share about, they'd gone to meet with the church people about what they're doing for this semester, and last year she said the students did a whole big thing on nutrition. Well, she said their snacks were all like junk food, pizza, chips, and things like that. And she kind of chuckled, but I thought, that's a good reaction because she's realistic about, what things. So I thought that was really pretty good that she's able to step back and not be angry about it and say, why aren't they changing, but just realize that this is going to be a challenge. So I think that's the toughest thing for them because they want to make a big difference, and that's not going to necessarily be the case. I mean, some communities are so appreciative, and really they do get a lot of good feedback, but that's not always the case, and that's tough.
Did I answer your no? Yes? You okay?
To my question about how do you prepare them, yes.
Now your next question.
Yes, you talked about a learning curve.
Yeah.
Let me hog. What's the learning curve? You alluded to the fact that it was steep.
I did.
So what is it that they're having a hard time learning?
They're having a hard time accepting that they are not in charge. They're having a hard time that they don't have control over the schedule. They're having a hard time that, as Mark said, what they believe to be very important may or may not be received. It may be received and not acted upon. They do not like not having structure, because when we have them go into these settings, we give some boundaries, if you will, but we don't give really stringent structure at all.
And that makes nursing majors crazy.
Crazy.
It does.
Crazy. Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that you recognize that. So that's probably the steepest. Now, let me tell you what it is for faculty. You know what?
Community.
Exactly. Community is not on our schedule. I have people say, well, why don't we just assign the students, why don't we just assign, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, why don't we just assign a clinical group that would be like this and it would be easier for us? The easier for us, quote unquote, is not what we're looking for. So it's that whole piece of it's not my schedule. The checkbox hasn't been checked and the due date went past. Those kinds and it does take a lot. And in all fairness to everybody, it does take a lot of flexibility. But those are the steepest, just adjusting to somebody else's schedule.
I had to alter my expectations because when we originally came up with a plan, we had them doing something as sophomores right away, and we realized their job at that point is just to get to know the community and understand it, not to be doing something. So we really had to pull back from that and change our expectations. So I think, as much as, I've been a lot of part of the initial work in getting all the input from communities, but I still needed to learn that. So as faculty, we need to be open to change and reframing how we look at it too. And that doesn't always come easy also. So that as students kind of struggle, you kind of think, yeah, this is not quite working. Yeah.
And the whole value, the relationship piece is difficult. until they're into maybe their third, fourth semester working with the group, and then they begin to realize, hey, this relationship is really important and it's making a difference. And they get that piece. And we get to read the reflections. There's a lot of this that I didn't talk about. About all the things that you want to talk about, but we do have them reflected in a number of places in all the courses, and we get to read those. And sometimes I know that they're telling me what they think I want to hear, but other times it's not that at all. It's really been a transformation, and that's always fun. And then when they go out and get their job and they graduate, now because we've got 2 classes do that, and then to hear those students talk about it is really good.
One of the things is sometimes the students have a hard time recognizing that they have their own culture.
There you go.
You know, that sometimes is a problem. You know, they see somebody else has a culture, but they don't see that they have a culture as well.
I'm curious if you've got any kind of processes or tools that you use to help the students kind of understand the community that they're coming into. You know, do ethnographies or...
We have them do, there's a couple of things that they do. They do a windshield survey where they actually, and there are specific questions that ask about the strengths of the community and the health of the community. It looks at environment, it looks at SES, it just looks at a lot of different things. And then there's a component of it that we added this year where they actually take a picture of something that's significant in that community, and then they have to talk about why that's significant. So that's a piece of it. Also, in our population-based course, we talk a lot, Bernie does the cultural piece of it. And so we do talk about culture from a variety of perspectives and trying to prepare them. And do we do it at the best of times? We kind of do it where we can fit it in, so it does start in the sophomore year. But probably the heaviest dose would be right now in the population-based course, both for the cultural components.
First semester senior.
First semester, and then the health equity piece, the strongest components do fall right now in this semester.
I'm just curious too, you know, going back to kind of the prototype Bethel student you're talking about, maybe the nursing major, how do you deal or try to deal, you know, with the issues they have of, you know, kind of putting task over relationships oftentimes, and, you know, the focus on time, that type of thing. You know, how do you try to deal with that?
Well, I would say, and again, you guys help me out here, but I would say from a group perspective and from an individual perspective, the group either teaching it online, or from a cultural perspective, to be respectful. In our CE seminars, we spend time with speakers. Sean's come in, and our 201 classes come into other. We have other speakers that come in and talk about those kinds of things and go through some exercises that kind of help them think about it. And I and the other faculty liaisons spend a lot of time individually with students who come in and say, you know, this just is working great, or this just is not working at all, and what should I do? And so it's both at a kind of a class course type and also individual. I can tell you that from student to student, boy, when you've got seniors that are enthused, it goes all the way down to the sophomore level. You know, if you've got seniors that have not been happy, you know, and they've had some experiences, then that trickles down to the sophomores as well. And so now we've been at this long enough that I think the attitude coming down from the seniors is generally quite positive. So that also helps. They kind of walk alongside the juniors and sophomores and say, come on, you know, we can do this. We can work together and do this. So those are, in very general terms, what we do.
And to be honest, our first group was very unhappy.
They were very,
Yeah, we had some learning to do. So they would go away and say this is the worst thing and why do they have to do it? But we turned it around, I think. Yeah. But we learned.
And they would say, well, if I'm going to volunteer, why can't I pick my own place? You know, why are you picking it for me? Really? Or I don't want to work in that population. I literally had students sit across from me and say, I don't want to work in that population. And I'm looking at them thinking,
Are they going to say that at work?
Yeah.
you know, or so why would I go there? You know, why would I even want to go there? You know? So, you know, and I guess I really try to allow students a space to feel safe and talk about their true feelings, but at the same time, because of all my years in community, I have some boundaries that I just say, okay, I hear what you're saying. Unless it's an issue that has to be addressed, then we need to walk through this together, and how are we going to do that? We don't let them go out. In fact, I one of my evaluations that says, don't bother talking to Carol, she's not going to change your site. So,
You can take that as a positive But Dave, and, you know, like you were asking about task-oriented and thinking about culture, I think maybe, you know, Carol does a wonderful job in this, but also when it translates into the clinical area, where they do what they call care plan, which is supposed to be very individualistic for this particular patient. And so the faculty, we all try to say, okay, you know, this is a mom patient, you know, how does that influence it? They haven't said anything about that, you know, and we will ask the questions on their care plan, because they should be thinking about that, because it's supposed to be individual to that patient, whatever that patient's problem is, be it, you know, they just had a baby or whatever, you know.
Questions, anything else, any other experiences you've had that would be helpful for us?
Do you ever find yourself wanting to be able to find a way to protect the community?
All the time, every day.
And what lessons do you have to pass on?
Well, for me, I'll just be honest, it pretty much comes naturally because of my years in the community. You know, they hear me say all the time, but what does the community think? We need to go back to the community. We need to ask the community. Sean, you can chime in on this one too.
But just reminding people that really the experts are the community. And so we do that on a regular basis. The people who are, you know, the liaisons, we do that on a regular basis. So that's probably the most important thing. I also, when we select communities, I try and match the faculty liaison to that community and kind of get an understanding of where that faculty person is coming from, and they actually, you know, when I say assign, I mean, that's a mutual decision, that's a negotiation, so that people are really going to sites that they're comfortable with. For instance, Marge is at school sites, and she's in a domestic violence shelter, and she's very comfortable being in those settings, and Dave Mahovich is in an early childhood setting, and he's very comfortable there, and I'm all over the place in churches and Head Start, and I'm comfortable there from my clinical background, and so we try to match it that way.
So the faculty are comfortable, and yet for students, if I'm uncomfortable with the site that you have assigned me, how do you protect the community from me acting out
We ask the
or being inappropriate?
We ask the community. Our liaisons work with the community, and we ask for if there are any problems, and maybe
Well, we do give students a choice on type of setting, whether that's church or school, so we try and match that, so at least they're getting some choice there.
That's true.
But I have not had any difficulty with any of the students at Cornerstone, it's family violence shelter you mentioned. And I've had a male student there too, that worked out just fine, so the agency itself was very, very protective initially and wouldn't let the students do much. But gradually, as the relationship developed, they trusted us more and more and more. And now, it's great.
Yeah.
You know, it's great.
Yeah.
You know, students are able to come to support groups and do a presentation on a health issue. And we've got a coordinator liaison there and as we've developed this over time, our liaison there in the agency knows kind of what the students are going to be doing and what to expect. And it makes my job more and more easier because I don't have to do as much kind of coaching along the way to kind of get things set up right away. The other thing we're introducing this year is an agency feedback form. Mm-hmm. So we're going to actually include that in the grade.
Yeah.
Well, that's like with student teaching, that would be like asking
Yeah. And we as faculty liaisons ask to be included in all communication. So if we see something that's going a little awry, if we can see irritation from the community partner in those response emails, then we can, you know, early on, or if we see a student that's maybe not phrasing something quite like they could, or we see another opportunity, then we can do that. I mean, we can. I'm going to pass this out because I know you have to go. Just we'll start this one around here.
Let me
Go ahead.
address just a couple of things that you brought up your
There are
question.
two
I
different
think that,
And I have more advice, so
Sure.
if I slip out, it's not you.
yeah. So the idea of where do you begin with helping students understand the community, I think that the very first place that you should start is with helping the student see themselves.
That's very good.
Most of the time, most of the students that I interact with, or are on autopilot. And that has been instilled in them for a very, very long time. Not that they're not aware, it's just like being a pilot. They get up to cruising out up to, they hit the button, and they're on autopilot. And so it's hard for them to see anything outside of what's going on. And so you have to introduce a little bit of turbulence. So they autopilot so that they have to get their hands on the stick. And in doing so, if a student understands that they have a culture, that they have a place, that they have a standpoint, and from that standpoint they have a view or a lens, and that their lens is not necessarily bad, not a bad lens, it's that this is how you see the world. It's not a bad thing, but this is how you see your reality. And that's not a bad thing. Yet, at the same time, someone else has a different lens, and they can see the same object and see something different. And so I kind of explained it. I used to be a former cop. And so when you go to a traffic accident and it's in the middle of the street, you would never ask just one person, what did you see from this angle? I would ask everyone around what they saw, because that would help me get a better picture of what's going on there. And so making students aware that they have a lens and that you see something, but you may see something else if you were standing somewhere else. So that's the first part. Where are you standing? And I think the second part, as for protecting the community, is just being mindful of how do you protect yourself. Once you get clicked into the understanding that I have a culture, I have an identity, I have a place, I want to be protected, then the question becomes, should not these folks also want the same things that you desire? And the answer is yes. And so what would it mean for me to give someone the ability to have those things? And we talk about Salbona, which means I see you. But not just I see, but I see your full humanity. And if I'm going to use that type of a lens to see your full humanity, then am I being gracious and kind and merciful as I engage you? And if the answer is no, then that's on me to correct that, not you to change to fit my own cultural norms of what's right and wrong.
Thanks, Rick. I have a couple of questions. So I noticed that in listing examples of community partners, every time a religious organization has been mentioned, you guys have always used the word church. So I'm wondering, is that just because as Christians, that's our stand-in word for a religious group, or is it because the specifically religious groups that you work with are always Christian?
Yes, so, well, as far as the religious groups, I would say they are all Christian.
Is that intentional?
It was how we started. We actually started with the Stair Step Foundation out of Minneapolis, which is a grant-funded organization that works primarily with African American churches. And so there were probably over 20 churches in that organization, and they really wanted to partner with us, and we really wanted to partner with them, so we started there. Other churches have since come on and have been interested, so that's how it started.
Other organizations are not Christian affiliated. We have Head Start, we have Angel Foundation, which is a family cancer center or support center. Cornerstone, I don't believe that has a Christian.
Yeah.
Well, I was just wondering because I'm aware. I'm thinking in Frogtown, for example. I'm aware of specifically religious organizations that aren't Christian. That are Muslim, for example. And so I was just. It occurs to me that could be a really terrific opportunity. For students, I recognize that complicates the partnership potentially. And then I guess my other question is a related one, and that is no matter what the organization is, I'm imagining that one of the recurring cultural pieces is often a religious one. Or at least occasionally is a religious one.
I would say occasionally.
So I was just wondering how you help students be prepared for that or process that?
I think it's really individual with the site and the student group. Even for some of our Caucasian students, our white students who have never been to any other kind of church, I'll just use that as an example, and they go to an African-American church and it's a 3-hour service. They always want to talk to me about that. They always want to know why it's 3 hours. Just a little piece like that. So we do a lot of talking around that. The other cultural pieces are things like when they go to Head Start and they see children, they see poverty really for the first time, and they see these children have terrible dental caries and they can't get care. So it is both a religious piece and it's also the whole issue about just a different cultural perspective, not really realizing. A huge one is around nutrition. I have a lot of students who really believe if you want to eat well, you can eat well. And there's just no reason why you can't eat well. Well, they go in on some of these home visits with the early childhood program and they begin to see the reality of why you can't eat well. And so those are kind of the cultural pieces. So it goes all the way from the cultural piece of being Christian but yet different, or not being Christian, that kind of piece. So, but I think you have an excellent point, and I think as Sean and I work together more in the Frogtown area, and I know you're working in that interfaith piece, we'll be doing more and more and working with other organizations. I just recently met a Native American man representing a Native American who's interested now, and so that certainly would add another piece. And so we're working on that, but that's an excellent suggestion.
What are your thoughts? I mean, it'd be great to be able to have our students go for like 5 semesters, but what about like for like a single semester course, you know, much shorter? I mean, just the reality of what you can expect of the students. So what do you think of shorter engagements?
Well, I can address that. When we tried to put service learning in courses in the nursing program for a long time. Actually, the service learning course became popular. And we did that in their senior course spring semester.
For one course.
One course. But it takes so much time to engage with the population.
Yeah.
That's the relationship building. There's no time for it.
Yeah.
And
so do you think it's
yeah, well, it was just, you know, and they had something more task-oriented to accomplish, but I don't think they really understood the organization and how you fine-tune and collaborate with things and do mutual planning. It's just really hard with the semester, so.
And what I hear from community is it's very difficult to have them come in and come out again. I know, Sean, you may want to say something about that as well.
Yeah, for the most part, it's not ideal. But I do think, but I will say that both ends are very necessary. And sometimes the idea of having a shorter engagement build upon a task that needs to get done right away, that will not get done without the resource of nails and hammers.
Painting something, whatever.
It's something that's not an inappropriate task. Because I will have folks who will come and say, we want someone to come in and just do this and then go back and do your thing. Or, you know, but for the most part, we want people to stick around for a longer time. And one of the things I've been working on this summer is the reality piece. The reality piece of 25 hours or 13 weeks. And then, I mean, there's got to be a balancing of both. And so part of it is dealing and talking with the community folks about the idea of if it isn't a year, then none at all. Is that a real reality when we do have students who do need some type of a engagement piece? Or so I think it's a balancing part, but the idea of literally saying it's got to look like this on either side, or no, or not at all, then what's the partnership? And for me, as in my role, I really do see it as dancing. It's the waltz, and there may be someone leading for a while, but then somebody else will lead. But I think that as someone who is in academics, who also lives in that community and has done both for a very long time, there needs to be balance between those two things. And I wouldn't say that you'd never do a short-term thing, but that should not be the main staple. That shouldn't be the stake that you're always engaging in, like one and done, one and done, one and done. Because then, folks, you do become a petri dish, and we don't want that. We want to be gardeners, we want to co-create together. And so I've worked with our partners on seeing that at this time, this course or this class, there's no room for more than that. And so I can guarantee a fall, a spring, and a summer student, but it may be a different student. But then we try to get what I like to call indirect impact, by meaning your organization, you have people who really can't do what you want them to do because they're in the back doing this thing. let us replace the back room so that you can go to the front room. And then that way, you're able to build capacity that way to where we're paying people to do these things, but we really can't get to the front to do the service part. Well, let us do that, and all we ask is that you allow the student to sit into a meeting or so. But that's different from nursing that's more hands-on. You know, a rec major, sociology, a business major, you're going to crunch numbers. You're going to sharpen education. You're going to sharpen pencils. I had one student who we had him sharpen 500 pencils, and he thought this was the most ridiculous thing in the whole entire world. Until afterwards, and we said, this paper mural, all the kids, teachers didn't have time to do pencils, teach, and mural. But because those pencils were done, that mural got done, and it just switched their mind that the butterfly is here, and then over there, this took place. And so that was one of those, I have no clue why I'm doing this. I sharpened pencils for the whole entire time. What did I learn? They go, well, what did you learn? And then here's the byproduct of what that was. And I always try to remind students the African proverb that goes, sometimes you don't get to enjoy the shade of the tree that you plant. Sometimes you just plant the tree and walk away, and that someone else will get the benefit of that shade and the fruit. Your job is to dig a hole, plant the seed, and walk away. Don't expect anything else. Now, years in the room, you may go, what's that? Oh, yeah, that was some kid a long time ago did that thing, and it's still going on. And you think to yourself, I was that kid. And so it's a both end.
I agree. I think expectations, clear expectations for the community and getting community feedback in the whole process is really key to success, whether it's short or long term. Otherwise, it's probably not going to work. But I think, again, if there's good communication.
Well, the other thing I was thinking of is, especially now that you're in the position that you're in, and knowing that, seeing people in your positions as the ones to provide the longer-term stability of relationships with organizations, than even if your particular students are more in and out, they're doing tasks that are helpful to the community because you're working with the community partners to help Jason figure out what would be an appropriate task for his students to do, like sharpening pencils.
I think that's really a great point because you do have some consistency.
Yeah.
So I have a question too, Carol. I imagine in all these discussions, race is going to be coming up all the time. I'm just curious if you've had any kind of model or framework or any kind of instructions that have been helpful, to give to students as they're talking about race issues. And my experience has been Bethel students aren't particularly skilled at that, don't know how to venture in. If there's anything that you've found to be helpful in getting them to really talk intelligently about race, yet honestly and respectfully.
I'm going to let Bernie respond in just a second because I think you do a lot of the cultural piece. But there was a model that we use called the Purnell model. It's not my favorite model. It's something that's out there that was chosen, and it's a place to start. But I think back to what Sean said, I think that the key element that we use is really who are you and what is your culture and what does that mean to you. I think that's probably the element that we use the most. And also, again, remember, we're coming from a health equity standpoint. So there are certain things that relate to certain populations. And so students can learn about that population by looking at the health statistics. And statistics is not the right word, but learning about a population from a historical perspective and why is health like this. And so we come to it from a really different angle, I think. And so do we have an absolute framework? I would say no. We use a little bit of everything. Do you guys want to say something
I
about that?
think you said it very good. And we try to use reflection for them to reflect too.
And true reflection. How do you feel? Not what I did today. A number of our students want to say, I was at a place for 5.5 hours today, and in that 5.5 hours, I sharpened 500 pencils. Instead of I was in a school in the community, and while I was there, I met a number of children, who, whatever they're going to discuss. And so we really try to point it back, and try to use our questions, and we use a lot of forms, but pointing back to, I think, I feel. It's really.
When I do my classroom lecture, you've heard this a couple of times. I always start, or I try to start with the idea of power and authority. And power is the means to do something. Doesn't mean it's just plain power. Authority is the right to use that. And so, what is power, and then what is authority? And then once that gets locked into their mind, I then talk about the concept of racialized. Not racist, but racialized. And when something is racialized, race then means something. And that in any different environment based upon your race, it becomes racialized, and then there's power and authority. So then the question is, does my race give me more or less power in this environment compared to that environment, compared to that one? So there may be an environment where I go to where the color of my skin really just skyrockets my power, my means to do something, and my authority. And in other places, it may be limited. It may be limited by a system. It may be limited by an individual. It may be limited by rules. But instead of saying this is racist and that's not racist, and this is racist behavior and that's racist behavior, we say that there's power and authority, and then that race, when it becomes racialized, gives you power and authority based upon individuals, systems, and rules. So then it's going to be like this kind of a checkpoint of, okay, I have more power and more authority. Why is that? Well, these rules allow me to do so, that work for this person. And so that's the starting point, not the end all, because it gets murky. But I think you need to have a starting point that, first of all, puts turbulence. Autopilot's got to come off. I've got to put my hands back on. I can't do autopilot here. And then working through that. And, but I think that's the starting point. And so I think that sometimes whenever you use the word race, people get swolled up and begin to bubble. And I didn't even use the word racism yet. I just said race, and all of a sudden. So then I get to the word racism towards the end. And in the beginning, I deal with racialized, which just means there's power and authority with race, and depending upon the environment, you'll have more or less of it. And then why is that?
Yeah.
So then the question is, why is that, and not am I being a racist or not being a racist? It's why do I have more power? You have less power and authority based upon this environment. And I think for me, I have to start there, because that's a good place to start.
The other thing I would say that we try to consistently do across all semesters is to look at strengths. It's very easy to look at, what's not right with whatever community you're in. And I think that also helps to think from a positive, or at least from somewhat of an open mind, if you begin to look at what are the strengths. And I did just want to point something out to you all that I handed out here. There is a local organization that actually has a grant, and these are on the back of the one that says assess your work. It's a list of those organizations who are really, there's not any academic representation here, but these groups are very, very involved in community engagement. And if you'll open it up, you'll see that there's on page 2 and 3, in your leisure, if you want to, I just went to this series last week, and it really begins to ask questions about what's the difference between community engagement and outreach. And so you can answer these questions for what you've been involved in and kind of make an assessment. I asked permission to share this with you all, and they gave me permission as long as I told you this is a draft. Because actually when we met last week, there was already some revisions that they're going to be doing, and then this product will come out. But I think it's a nice start to think about the difference between outreach and community. This is a great website. There's, I think, a very good video at this website as well. It's about 18 minutes long that talks about community engagement and what it really means, and really the community is speaking. And the other tool that's on here is, if you look at the second page, apparently, if I understand this correctly, and I've just had a brief introduction, but there was a Native American community that actually used this tool to look at some of the programming that they're doing. So I thought this might be helpful too. And again, I want to say that this is definitely a work in progress, but it's something for you just to have a look at and to kind of go to these websites and take a look. I thought it was very helpful. This was simply, Marge and I wrote an article, and it's going to be published soon, I hope, but this is just some of the references that we use. I tried to pick some that weren't so nursing related, but more general, and so that's just a reference list. I hope the APA is okay. If it isn't, I didn't do it. In reality, I did. But that's all.
Okay. Carol, thank you so much. And could you give us just a glimpse of kind of what your next section, the October 27th one, will focus on? Just a little teaser maybe here, if you could.
Part of what's come out of the community engagement work is working with people outside of our profession. And for example, we have students who work with pastors, who work with health coordinators, who work with teachers, who work with just whoever happens to be in the community. And so it's really helped us, and one of our essentials in nursing is to look at interprofessional education and practice. And so it's just expanded our world to look at what does it mean to get out of your comfort zone, if you will, please, and get into working with other professions. So that's what we're going to talk about, and what the kind of cultural experience that is.
Thank you all for coming.
Yes.
Carol, especially thank you, and Sean, thank you as well.